Hello, good creatures, and welcome. My name is Petrina Calder, and I'm here with my friend Nate.
Yes, and I'm Nate Bolding, and today we're going to be having a discussion on The Good Life by Robert Waldinger and Mark Schulz.
We read this book together as part of kind of our ongoing book club conversations, and the theme of this book was looking at that longitudinal Harvard study that was just looking at what are the things that predict people's health, happiness, life satisfaction, and accomplishment over time. And what they have repeatedly found through that study is that the single biggest predictor of a person's health and happiness is the quality of our relationships. It came up again and again, and this book explored a number of different angles on that. And so I think there's lots in this book that we could talk about, Nate. What were some of the things that stood out most to you in this book?
Yeah, I think for me, there was it kind of just a dagger on three concepts that kind of were pretty home to me without touching too deeply, that a lot of my life had been really going after certain outcomes and goals and really doing anything I could to get to those things. And a little bit of background going into sort of almost like a pretty long period of lone wolf type behavior. And so I had moved into a point in my life where that was actually, I think, the point that I was suffering from. I felt a little bit isolated and lonely. And that's where this book intersected pretty hard. And I'm going to be honest, I couldn't even finish it just because it intersected right with the move to Calgary and being alone in a new city, new job that was even further removed from relationships with another tier of leadership. When you have your team, a lot of times you make the team, but you're not part of the team. And then so for me going into a role where now it's like I was managing the managers, it got even further removed. And my only relationships at that point in the previous chapter were my work relationships. And then so this book actually hit a pretty big trigger point for me that I had to kind of leave at rest a little bit, but very, very valuable information. And I kind of put 3 points that I got, and I almost got the book done, but I had to stop right at the partner one because that was a particular soft spot. And so my 3 things were that kind of relationships are the point and the protecting factor, and that suffering is inevitable, the regardless of demographic, and we get good at things that a lot of times are not good for us. And that was a particular trigger point for me because it related to sort of some of the lone wolf behavior. Those were kind of the 3 spearheaded points that were the central theme for me, but also were really easy to sort of start taking action on. So I really did get a lot out of this book and started making action on the things that kind of stood out from it right away. Were there any main points or central themes that stood out in the book for you and that had an impact with you?
The things that stood out for me were about how the things we think will make us happy are actually not the things that we need for happiness. Things like success, accomplishment, money, admiration of people, or even health to a certain extent is not as predictive of our happiness as our relationships are. I also really appreciated that this book highlighted how relationships are really important. And I think that if you're not somebody who has lots of great close relationships and are really well networked with a community of support already, this message can really hit a nerve. And at the same time, they really did focus on really very practical, everyday strategies for how you can become more connected. So it wasn't a hopeless book. If you're in that place of kind of disconnection, they provided a pathway forward for how to foster those kinds of connections. And they also gave lots of great examples of how there was one study participant that they used as a case study where he had really prioritized career success and financial success throughout his life, and then went into retirement and was divorced and alienated from his kids and didn't really have any hobbies and was starting to get really lonely and depressed, but then decided to try and integrate into community. And he started joining leisure recreational sports and joining other social groups with for people his age, and then became very happy later in life. So even though all of his life had been characterized by kind of disconnect from relationships, he was able to foster relationships later in life that provided him the health and happiness and protective factors of relationships later on. So I think for me, that's kind of a hopeful message, is that even if you have been prioritizing the wrong things, that there is a pathway forward and that it is never too late.
Yeah, actually, there was a couple of those stories that just, and that was kind of with me with the regardless of demographic point. I think a lot of times we can get so caught up in what our individual experience is. And then you pull out and you really look at the bigger picture of what the human experience is. There's different contexts and there can be levels of severity of a given context, but really we experience sort of very similar type emotions to these situations. And I think it was interesting hearing some of the early study stuff from what is almost like a cultural thing, like more like early baby boomer time, that isn't sort of the culture that I've been in per se. Like it wasn't some of the norms that were related to me, but then the situations were like to the point. And I think there was one particular, it was a more grim one. It wasn't about where somebody took action on it, but it was kind of the same thing where they took two people. And one guy was a higher business executive and the other guy was a teacher. I don't know if you remember that part.
I do.
And it's like the teacher, obviously really busy work life, but some of the work was a little bit more meaningful to him, and had a family and had some variations to that, but was also a very, very busy person and experienced a little bit of backlash to being that busy person. But then some of the stories from that individual's life, like really prioritizing taking the kids out fishing, and really prioritizing one-on-one experience with his kids, and that the teaching allowed him to express some of that meaning in his work life as well. And very high, even some of his troubles with being such a busy person, really rated high perceived happiness over time. And then you go to the other side and had this guy who was a high level busy executive, had really, really pushed in life. I think he had been through 2 divorces. I think it was, and tail end, same thing. No really foundational relationships with work that was perceived to be moving up a ladder in relation to professional success, and getting higher up in the chain and being more successful and rated high levels of financial success, but had very low levels of perceived wellness over time. It went into kind of some of the interview stuff, but it was really interesting for me because that's kind of been one of the learning points for me over the last, I would say, was that maybe 2 years, where I've seen more professional success than I've seen in my 20s per se. Now my work has been really meaningful for me, but I made some sacrifices in relation to some of that professional success. And I found it early on where I'd kind of achieved some of that success, but it didn't quite feel as meaningful because I didn't have somebody and to share it with particularly. And it was meaningful to me. Like I did feel deep senses of happiness with some of these achievements that I'd had. But it kind of really struck a point where I had spent 2 years and maybe 10 years before that not prioritizing relationships and prioritizing outcome related goals for myself, even bodybuilding and sports, and then now career success. And that really, because I was already in it. And then what I would say is, when I moved to Calgary, it's like I was literally in the reflection on the last 10 years of my life, not prioritizing relationships. And then it's like this story drew out like a timeline for me. Like, what if, I don't notice these things and I just keep, chasing the ladder and more income per se, and like better financial success, property. And it relates to kind of some of the goals that I already got a little bit orientated to with like buying land. And it's like, I want land because my parents didn't have land, and them having their ashes spread on like a church that they went to for 2 years. And that's where they were buried, just always stuck with me. I don't know. I just didn't, I didn't want that. Like, I want some land that could be passed on, but that's the point. Passed on to what? Like, passed on to what? What is the land? The land is somewhere you have the family or the partner, dogs, whatever it is, whatever those relationships, friends that are the chosen family, could be your blood family, could be your partner and your kids. I think what really stuck out to me in this book is that the dynamic of the relationships isn't necessarily or say the specificity of the relationships isn't as important as the relationships, and actually having really, really good relationships over time. And for me, that story really stuck in because I was in the reflection of it, and then it painted out this timeline. And I think for me, the real connection, I just imagined if over the last 10 years I had been in a study like this, where, every once in a while someone's having an interview with me and they're documenting my answers and they're sending me surveys and what would I rate. And I honestly think I probably would have rated some pretty low scores on perceived well-being for a long time. And it's just like, it was interesting, but it hurt me a little bit because I was in it. But it was cool to see this comparison, regardless of a demographic, and something that wasn't the same black and white as me, but then I really identified with the story and the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I appreciate that they explored all kinds of relationships and the impact. So they looked at, primary romantic relationships, because when we use the word relationships in North America, when we say that word, often the relationship that immediately comes to mind is our romantic partners or our spouses. And they do explore that. Spouses are predictive of well-being and happiness and health, but like in both directions. You have the right spouse, it's hugely protective and predictive of happiness and health, particularly for men. Men do better with having a spouse than women do. Women do better with a spouse when it's a good relationship, but seem to have a lot more detrimental impacts when it's not a good relationship. Whereas men, it's like, even in a not so great relationship, barring abuse, men, even in like a neutral to lukewarm relationship, do better in relationship than they do alone. Whereas women seem to do better alone than they do, like they need to have a positive relationship rather than just kind of like a neutral relationship to have it contribute to happiness. But that's only one type of relationship. And they explore like connection to broader communities, relationships with your kids, having friends that you intentionally go out of your way to cultivate those friendships through the different phases and ebbs and flows of your life. Like how you might have friends that you made when you were younger, and maybe you get out of sync with one another in midlife because maybe they married and started having kids early and you waited until later. And so it just takes you out of sync for a little while. But making the effort to maintain those relationships is also really worthwhile and protective of health and happiness. And even right down to that one part of the study where they talked about happiness, or I should say, like positive association with an experience where they rode a bus in silence or rode a bus and were tasked with having a small talk conversation with a stranger. Asked in advance, people predicted that having the conversation with the stranger would make the bus ride more unpleasant. And almost universally on the backside of it, after having had the experience, people rated the bus ride as being much more positive for having had that interaction. And I think that's one of the things that I think is really is already become a problem in modern society, is that we don't have those small talk conversations with strangers anymore. You'll notice it's usually like, if you're out and about, it'll be somebody from like the boomer and older generation that'll like be standing in line with you and strike up a conversation. It is never somebody who is like, I'm Gen X, you're probably late millennial, and younger. We don't strike up conversations with randos out in public, right? We are going to be listening to a podcast or looking at something on our phone, or, turned inward, not turning to the people around us. And it really is a skill set that we are losing that ability. I do some work with younger people, and they talk about the anxiety they feel just at the idea of having to make a phone call and talk to a person, to call and, book an appointment with their family doctor, or to call and order a pizza. They were like, no, I'll do that online. I can't. Like, they're uncomfortable picking up the phone and talking to a person. So we're losing these social skills that are actually really helpful for how human brains are wired and how we are wired for attending to relationships. And I worry about that. I don't know if that's something that you think about.
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was the study. That was one of my biggest takeaways, because it really reflected to my lone wolf-like behavior and some interrelations with some partners that I've had, of things that actually rubbed me the wrong way at the time. And then now I'm like, holy, but it's, so that relates to my point of, we get good at things that aren't good for us.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, summing this up, I think it was like when my dad passed away and some of the things with ALS, it made me sort of quantify what would be my existential meaning of my time in the world to an outcome, a very specific outcome. And it was kind of pro bodybuilder, but it wasn't just pro bodybuilder. There was some things associated with that. Pro bodybuilder, kind of not having to work a conventional job cycle, that I could train people and make good money in that and be really, really financially successful, specifically financially successful, that I imagined being fucking jacked, intelligent, and financially successful. And that's all that bodybuilding pro outcome was meaning. Like, if I achieved that, I could die and things would be good. But then over that pattern of time, because I got so narrowed in on this outcome, I actually slowly started cutting off anything that I perceived would be not 1 + 1 higher value to that given outcome. So parties, friends, relationship dynamics, I was honed in, nothing mattered but those goals. And so I stopped doing the social things that I did when I was a little bit younger. And that kind of contributed to this sort of what I told as the lone wolf behavior. But I think it's also a little bit of sort of self-isolation, and some other things. But that study really stuck out to me, because I would have rated that somebody, I wouldn't have rated that it would have been worse, but I wouldn't have gone out of my way to talk to somebody intentionally. Like, I would have been fine sitting there in my own space, on my phone, listening to something, just whatever it was. I would have been fine by myself. And I really put all my social weight on my partner at that time, all of it. And I'm thankful I had a partner at that time, like through things like COVID. I think that would have been a rough point for me, but it highlighted this social fitness concept, that really stuck out to me. I actually had to write it down because it was probably my fourth big takeaway with the book, was that you get good at things that aren't good for you. And our social fitness things are getting worse, I think. That could go into some other dynamics about some of the things that we can do now, like even just texting, social media, audio things. It's like we can literally just exist in a box. And there's this actually whole growing problem. They illustrate in the book. I can't remember there's a word for it. It's going on in Japanese or in Japan, where people are literally not talking to anybody for years. They're living at home. They're working at home. They get groceries delivered to them. They play video games. Like, they do not leave their apartment. And I think this is one of the biggest systematic things in our society that's leading to increased levels of anxiety and depression. Because if you just go down to like more of like an evolutionary thought process on human beings, and it kind of connects to relationships, are the point for me is we were designed to not be solo animals. It's like we needed the pack to survive, and then we needed the pack to survive. It's a little quote that I always like to say is, the strength of the wolf is a pack and the strength of the pack is the wolf. But we're made really to suffer together, because if you really strip down some of the main points of what in our brains would be perceived as purpose, is survival, and reproducing. And then survival and reproducing are really connected to the group. And then, so then a lot of times for me, it's like, if you really start to strip down the meaning of things, it's like relationships and struggling in the pursuit of something meaningful connects. And at one point that was reproducing and literally surviving. But then, so then now we have this thing where we can actually get a lot of things met without having to engage in human conversations. But sort of circling back to that concept is, I think that was something I got really good at. I got really good at totally pulling everything out to get towards that goal. And for me, it was, this started a while ago when I started to notice it, but I didn't know what was making me so unhappy. I was having a lot of relationship problems because I was putting my whole social meaning, tidbit, friend, intimate relationship, everything onto my partner. And that's something that they can not possibly live up to. Like, that's outrageous. But then I didn't even sort of realize, because I had a partner and I was chasing this goal, and this goal meant everything. So the suffering in the pursuit of that goal was actually something that was meaningful for me. And sure, 1 + 1 is good. It provided me success over time, but I was really unhappy for a really long time. And then input some partner troubles and pulling that off the continuum, total frickin' life meltdown, because that was my only avenue. And actually, this book was really, really big for me, because I didn't really even realize that was going on, because when I was working the fitness manager role, I could just put everything into that. And then all my friendships and relationships were revolved into work too. So when I moved to Calgary, all that got stripped away, and then this book intersected with it, like perfect timeline. And it really upset me reading this book. It's funny, like, it really bothered me. I had a hard time reading the book. I remember I was driving to Med Hat, and I was listening to it to do a club visit, and that's a 3-hour drive. And I had to stop it 2 or 3 times, and I was just like, oh my God. And I took action on that one specifically. So that's this whole story is to get to that, is I actually started looking at my social fitness, because I had practiced that in high school. Like, when I started to try to make friends, I actually like took some of those things I'd learned and dug back in it. And I started having random conversations with people. I started going to run club. I started putting myself in these social situations. And my perceived well-being has improved since working on my social fitness and focusing on relationships, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. And then kind of circumvent back to one of the things that you said is, I think it's a big thing with anxiety, because people are getting social anxiety and they don't even realize how bad that is, because you're getting a back end fear signal from just something that you're actually not comfortable with. But then that's circumventing and now rewarding you to, like, it's telling you not to do this thing, and this is the thing you actually really need, and death cycle.
It's one of the things that's so insidious about anxiety, is that anxiety leads us to avoid the thing that is creating anxiety. But usually what we need to do is actually move toward the thing that is creating the anxiety. The avoidance of it is perpetuating it. And it is like a big problem. I think.
So I actually have a question for you. Oh,
sure.
Yeah. Well, I had a question for you, because you actually really helped me out with some of this stuff a while ago. Like, you were trying to push this into my face when I didn't want to see it. I was like in Red Deer, and you're saying go to run club. And I'm like, that sounds like the worst thing to do. Like, that's like, I don't want any part of that. And it draws a scenario to me. One of the first times I went to the run club, I planned it, figured out the date. I drove to the event, and I almost left. Like, I was sitting there, and I was like, some of the narratives that were going on in my head were crazy. It was just like, you don't need this. This is embarrassing. What's wrong with you? And it was like, I had that till that point had gotten really good at something that was putting me in the place of the very thing that was making me feel unhappy. And I went to the run club, and then I met somebody that day who introduced me to people. I ended up having a 3-hour conversation with this group of people, and I really needed that. I was in a pit of what felt like isolation, and I felt so much better that day. So the question I have for you is drawn in that. With this is something that you've kind of already worked on. Is there any situations that kind of stand out to you that you had been in a point where you realized you needed to do some of this stuff? Because you have your own experiences, but you telling me what to do tells me that you had lived through that type of experience. Is there anything you can draw upon that you think about some of the negative consequences of this type of scenario and how you got out of it, and so where you ended up?
I would be happy to, because I think the tremendous irony in how much experience I have with this is that, like, I genuinely am an introvert who is never bored when I am alone. So the fact that I have this experience of pushing myself is, I hope that that communicates to you and to others about, like, just how much I fundamentally believe in this is it being essential. It is essential as sleep for human beings, that we are social creatures. So part of where this came from is early experiences with like not so great relationships. I made the same mistake that many people make, which is that you get infatuated with somebody, you get into like a relationship, and you invest so much in that primary relationship, and you don't make the effort to maintain your other relationships because you've got other goals and whatever going on. But it creates such vulnerability for a human being to put all the eggs in that one basket. It also honestly puts too much pressure on that one relationship to fulfill all of our social needs. It's like no one person was ever meant to meet our social needs. So part of it is kind of coming from that insight. But then another piece of it was about one of the things that we do sometimes, or that I have done and that you have done, is that in pursuit of other goals, because it's not like relationships should be your only goal in life. To have financial goals and career goals is also important. And sometimes to take advantage of opportunities, you need to be willing to uproot yourself and transplant yourself to a different place, particularly if you grew up in a small town like you did or a small city like I did, and that there is no future for you in that place. You must uproot yourself. So relationships are important, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be willing to uproot yourself and go elsewhere. But when you do, then what? Because when you're not in school anymore and you get to the other place, how do you make friends? So I had my own experience when I left my first career and then moved to a different city to go back to school. I guess I was in school again, but at that stage, I was a full 12 years older than all of my classmates were. So it's like I had difficulty relating. I was getting lots of social contact, but they were not necessarily going to be my only source of friendships. Although I did end up making some fantastic friends with people I met going back and doing that undergrad that are still my friends today, at any rate. And so I had to push myself, and I got thinking about, like, how do you meet people? And at the time, I was actually involved in a lot of online gaming. So I was playing a massively multiplayer online role-playing game called World of Warcraft that many people have become addicted to and played at some point in the last 20 years. I loved that game, and I was part of a guild in that game, and so was getting some social needs. But again, that was virtual social needs, not in person. And so I was talking to them about, like, how did you meet people? And my friends in that guild were like, you need to go find the Society for Creative Anachronism. And I'm like, what is that? And they're like, it's called the SCA. It is an international organization. We do. So they were friends in real life. Many of the, like, closest friends that I had in this guild, we met through the society, and they were like, they're all over the place. See if your new city has one and go check it out. They will have someone that's called a chatelaine. The chatelane's job is to welcome and invite in the new people. They'll have a newcomers night. Just reach out to them. They'll take care of it. And I'm like, yeah, but what do? They do medieval reenactment. And I was like, okay, that's niche. And they're like, trust us, Petrina, you like gaming, you like us, you're going to love these people. And I was like, okay. So kind of like with you with the Run Club, and you had filled with judgments about, like, this is so stupid. Like, what kind of people am I going to meet at this place? But I took the leap of faith. I listened to the guidance of a friend, and I went to this thing, and I showed up, and I met the most delightful people. And they were so welcoming into their community. And people who are not familiar with the SCA, go look that up. Like, there's so much fun to be had. I learned archery. I learned mead making. I learned about how to make medieval clothing. We would dress up and go to feasts, and, like, there would be sword play and play, like, backgammon. And it was just like, and feasting, like, it was just so much fun. It's not something I've continued to do, but having that experience I just loved it so much. And I've maintained some of those friendships as well. So then when I moved to a new city, I was like, okay, part of it is about being willing to go out of your comfort zone, being willing to go and find leisure activities outside of work that are inherently social, because you meet people not through like finding them through like Bumble for friends, but by going and actually doing things. And that you may not be interested in the actual thing they are doing, but you need to think about, like, in the Venn diagram of stuff you're into, where are people who are into the same kinds of things as me likely to go and congregate, and you go find those people. For you being in fitness, that's why I thought for you, Run Club, you should 100% be going to Run Club, because it's already a natural group that is happening. They meet regularly. It's easy for newcomers to get involved. I think doing that's really important. The other place that it's come up then in my life, because I moved a second time, and then I also moved across the country out here to Edmonton. And it was just, again, by joining leisure groups, then you find your people. The other place that it's come up is through my work working with women in recovery from addictions. One of the major hurdles to overcome as a person who has lived with addiction, especially if you've lived with addiction for a really long time, is that it's not just about use of the substance, it's about a whole lifestyle that goes into that, about you have all your fun or celebration or leisure time is all spent using that substance with other people who are using that substance. And when you're not in leisure time using that substance, often you're engaged in the activities that are required to get the money to get the substance. And it just becomes so consuming that then when people are trying to get clean and sober, they have no idea. They don't have friends that are clean and sober. They don't, like, I've had so many people in recovery just so earnestly ask me the question of, like, but what do normal people do for fun? Like, if you're not getting drunk, what do you do? And being genuinely, like, not knowing how to answer that question for themselves. And so I think it is normal as an adult to struggle with figuring out where am I going to find like-minded people? And there needs to be a little bit of willingness to do some trial and error about finding people. And so my hat's off to you, Nate, because in moving to Calgary and kind of having some of these epiphanies for yourself, you have been willing. And that's not to say that there wasn't a little part of you that was resistant to it, but that you have genuinely been open-minded enough to give things a try. And I think that alone is a big predictor of your long-term success in finding your people.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there that I think is really, really good. Like, it's like, you just even think about that. Like, you sold me on this. I want to go. I actually did a little bit of archery when I was younger, but that sounds like awesome. Because it's just like, I think one of the biggest things now is, especially like in high school, like, most people, like, if you're living in North America, you're going to have a couple things that knock very similar cultural upbringings. Like, school for everybody over here, and even people who are coming over here, they get indoctrinated into that. That's what we do. And school is that, like, it's just like, and it's like everybody has this memory of school being like the jungle, because it is. It's like you just got bunch of young kids all in the same demographic as a elementary school, middle school, high school, whatever it is. And it's like you just got them all together. And then it's just like there's some rules, but it really does go anywhere because you're just meeting people in different experiences. But a lot of things is there's this forced social interaction. You're going to school, you're going to play basketball, or you're going to do piano, or whatever opportunities are available at that school, they're going to come up. And then the influence of your friends and your parents and what direction those look like, but you're going to meet people. Like, you can't miss out on it. And then you're going to have different directions that people go. I think everybody's correlates to animals. It's like you see animals that didn't get socialized. They get aggressive, and there's problems with it. And humans are no different. Like, the exact same thing happens. Like, we need social skills. And then everybody kind of usually like should come out of school with some sort of related social skills. Most people went through school at least having one friend. I started out in school with not a lot of friends. My problem solving brain, I figured out what made the popular kids popular. And I think it's funny when I think about my school experience, I got popular because I was from a broken home, and nobody was calling my parents to say something was going on. So I could do the things that the cool kids couldn't do because a lot of them were from regular homes. So I actually had this reflection earlier because I was thinking in high school, actually, like the tail end of high school, I actually, like, when I think back to that, there was some pretty happy times because I just had a really close group of friends. And just like you brought up earlier, that's a protection factor. I think with me and some of my attachment dynamics, I'm relatively volatile to people I get connected to. And I did have volatile relationships in high school, but I had that group. And it's like funny when I was thinking back to some of this stuff recently, because I'll enlight that I went through a breakup, moving to Calgary, and then there was a lot of dynamics related to that stuff. But I noticed how much more it affected me not having like a rich social group, because the last time I had experienced that, and really it's like, honestly, the last 2 years have been a little bit crazy for me in relationships. But one of the things I kept noticing actually is, the last time I'd been through this was in tail end of high school, and not having that social group was huge. But so when you think about what happens as you get further away from that sort of cultural foundation, which is school, if you don't go to university and then you go to work, a lot of times then what happens, I think especially in Alberta, is you got that working culture. And I think that oil field and rotation work, I think, is quite destructive for people's mental well-being over time, because it's like they say, if you're just working all the time, you could build good relationships there, but what happens when you're not working and you don't have a foundation? But I think now it's like that's going to be one of the foundations in our cultural norms. As people get further away from school, if they don't go to university, you're getting less forced interactions. So you're not going to be able to just exist. If you move away from those early friends, you're going to have to create new friends somehow. And the consequence of not is dire. But the biggest limiting factor is the story you're going to tell yourself about why you shouldn't do that thing, or why you shouldn't put yourself out into that scenario. Because I think it's a big, actually, predictor in even high school, the type of social group you build. If you're not scared, or if you're not able to put yourself out into the field of the social arena, you're not going to make relationships. And you kind of have to. And then so it's like, one of the things that's sort of foundational here is everybody's going to hit this point at some time if it's not prioritized. And if I think loneliness can fall into different brackets. And I think one of the stories that were brought up in the book was really good. A story about some relationship dynamics where people were experiencing deep sense of loneliness in the relationship because they didn't feel safe or supported by the partner. But I think loneliness you can be around people and still be lonely. You can be by yourself and not feel lonely. But if you're experiencing loneliness on whatever the continuum is, it's bad. It's disastrous for you. It's going to really affect your quality of life. And I think we have to put in levers to affect that. But you had a point you kind of wanted to make. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I have. It leads me to think about a topic that I'm pausing so that if we want to edit this out, we can.
Okay, all right.
It leads me to think about all of the chatter in certain social circles, particularly in certain corners of the internet, about the quote-unquote male loneliness epidemic, which is both a very real thing and is not caused by the things that the talking heads on the internet say that it is caused by. It is not caused. It is not caused by women. Men are doing this to themselves because they are making male relationships, social friendship dynamic relationships, are now being infiltrated by this really bizarre, antisocial, and quite frankly, like friendship rules and expectations for how men should be with one another. And so it's making male friendships with one another really quite toxic. And then because that's who they're associating with and that's who those niches of men are, they think that those social norms are normal in terms of like being commonly accepted across the world. And they're not. They're just really loud on the internet. They're not common in the world. But because they're kind of saturated in that and they believe that that's normal, and then they're getting really toxic with one another. So those are not relationships or friendships that are characterized by support. And those same men are then turning to women, but they're making the same flaw that many people do if they're thinking that I need to have one romantic partner and that that's my person, rather than trying to cultivate actual relationships and friendships with women. And they want to get into a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship with a woman, but it seems like they fundamentally just don't even like women. And part of it is because what social groups do for us, I worked in a prison for a long time. And one of the things that we do is we look at what are the things that contribute to antisocial attitudes and criminal behaviors. And having a positive social network is one of the most protective factors, and it's also one of the biggest vulnerabilities. If the social network that you are attached to is full of people who hold antisocial or criminal beliefs, and they tell you that those antisocial and criminal beliefs are normal, you are going to behave in antisocial and criminal ways. And so that's what these young men are doing. They're behaving in incredibly antisocial ways that are going to block them from being able to create friendships or romantic relationships. It's going to be so off-putting to people that people want nothing to do with them. And then they blame women or they blame the Chads or whatever. And it's like, no, dude, you just need to stop listening to the douchebags who are feeding your brain this bullshit. Like, take a step back and actually talk to some actual real human beings in real life, not on the internet. And maybe get out in nature, touch grass, like breathe some fresh air, and like clear your head, because the male loneliness epidemic, it is a very real thing, and I worry about it because part of it is because of how online spaces and electronic communication is impairing our ability to just have small talk with strangers, which is kind of a necessary prerequisite for developing relationships. So like we're losing the social skills. That is a very real problem. But then there's also this insidious piece of the internet that is taking a very real problem that young men are experiencing and exploiting it for their attention and the economies of attention. I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah. Oh, fuck.
Please.
Yeah. Because I like that you brought that up, because I think the red pill stuff is really fucking nasty. I would say I was never put into it totally, but I think just some of the behaviors that I had elicited with this very specific outcome that I was chasing put me into some of the scenarios that could have led into that, but like not that it was always something, because the internet could be insidious. It can be good. It could also be insidious because you get this person who's vulnerable, who's really experiencing pain, and then you give them an extreme answer in something that looks like the solution to that. And I think that's what the red pill stuff is, and they capitalize on hurting people that are struggling, who didn't have good male role models, who didn't have good female role models, didn't have good parenting, don't have a good older brother, a good male friendship. It's disgusting. So I don't hate that you brought it up, because for me, I always categorize it. For me, I saw it in two ways, like being a male and growing up through the different spheres of development and things, because I think that's all what it is like that's this game in life, is gaining certain wisdom and experiences and learning from them. And I think I always categorized male loneliness on two sides because I experienced a deep sense of it. There was a lot that was going good when I moved to Calgary, but I can just quite factually say that might have been one of the darker mental places I've been with, even with losing my dad and my mom and early things. And I don't know exactly what played into it, but I think it was the first time I had really felt a deep sense of loneliness. But I've been lonely before. Like I've always moved around. I tell a story to people right now. It's like, even in the last little bit, I've been in 5 different cities over the last 5 years with 3 different jobs. And that's hard to create good social network. But I always categorize male loneliness for me on 2 sides, because then I saw it. One of the times I saw, as a leader, you meet a lot of different people and different demographics. This baby boomer, a little bit earlier, cultural norm around how males had been taught to express their emotions, I think is quite nasty. I think it's like the male shame is that don't be appeared to be weak. Like you don't cry, you don't show your emotion, you shut up and do your fucking job. And I think that's like, if we're going to war and like we are on a moment that could change the history of good and bad, like that, maybe we don't have time to get caught up in our emotions. We got to do what we should be doing. But that's not like, it's like there's this extreme ends of things, but I think there's this cultural norm, because even I got caught up in it too, of just like, don't show your emotions, you don't deal with it, you do what you need to do. And in a healthy way, it's good for men to be able to regulate their emotions and continue to be able to do things, men and women. Like, emotional regulation is good, but totally blocking that shit off in a box for 35 years is a pretty disastrous thing. And I always like this analogy of, for me, I like the ocean and that our emotions are the waves and we're the beach. It's a really good analogy, because then when you're really in some dark or intense emotions, you can conceptualize that this is the storm and it's going to pass. And I think that's a really, really good visual point for people. But I like this analogy of the emotions being the road signs. And I've talked about this before with people that I've been working with, where I've seen this thing come up, because I think I've really had to navigate my way through this one specifically. Because I think by the time some of the red pill stuff had hit, I'd already become solid enough to see what's wrong with this. So I'm going to talk about the red pill stuff after this, because this is the real one. The red pill one is like, it'll be nasty down the road, and it's doing stuff nasty right now, but I think it is still sort of built on the foundation of this one. This one started earlier, because and that's where I'll touch on that. But with this one, I always play this imagine you're in a freaking city. It's like you're going through some intense emotions. You can't read the road signs, and there's no phone to Google the language. You're just in the iron jungle, and you have no idea where you are, but there's a lot of things going on. And I think what happens, I'm not going to say the name, but I have had somebody cross my path in the last 5 years of my life who I saw this, and I saw he was probably about 65 now, and and because I was working with him from a leadership opportunity, and we talked about this. Talked about he's like having more emotion now than he's ever had. He doesn't know what's going on. There's a lot of things. He found himself alone at 65 with no family. And we talked about suicide, and we talked about him. If he didn't find the path that he's on, he doesn't know if he would make it. And he would talk about how he's watched all the people he knew died of health-related things or suicide. And it was interesting to get a window in something I've thought a lot about and then experienced myself, but get fast forward 35 years. And I think for me, it just boils down to, I think, that one fact. I think it's just like it got to a cultural norm that shut up, do what you're supposed to do. But what you're supposed to do is like make money and provide regardless of anything. Like, you got to go to work and you got to do what you're supposed to do, and you're not going to process your feelings. I think on the negative side, that turned into a whole generation of people who have no fucking idea what they're feeling, and the easiest emotion to feel is anger. And so it's like, I think it's a fundamental skill in relation to emotional regulation, but not just regulating, but literally experiencing it. Because then I think over time, and obviously you're pretty, and I'll let you touch in here, is it's like those neurotransmitters stay. Like, and if you spend 60 years never learning to feel something, it touches into so many different ways, but that is a catastrophe over time and is really hostile to a relationship specifically. I have a red pill touch, but it looked like you had to, and you're very versed in this. So
yeah, I would love to hear where you're going to go next. So it's just a quick interjection to say that that piece around, it's not just even about a willingness to pay attention to your emotions and to try and express them. It's that when you haven't practiced doing that or learned how to do it, that literally people have like an impoverished vocabulary for even being able to give voice to naming what is this thing I am feeling. And that's a lot of the work that I will do with clients, more in the past, but I still do some of it now, is helping people who have been really emotionally repressed, whether that is about compartmentalizing emotions, repressing emotions, or numbing emotions, when you've not been paying attention to the emotions. I even had one person, this was kind of the most extreme version of it, but that she would only ever report she was feeling happy or she was feeling negative. And that one word, negative, was a placeholder for every single other emotion experience that wasn't happy. So in her world, it was dichotomous. There were two emotional experiences, happy and negative. And trying to help somebody learn how to regulate anger is different from helping somebody learn how to regulate anxiety or sadness or fear. And so to begin to help this person learn how to regulate their emotions when they're having lots of behavioral outbursts related to those emotions is like, sometimes you got to break it down to just the basic fundamentals of like, where are you feeling this in your body? Can we label that and give it a name? And that it, in our society, because people don't talk about their feelings, there really is many people have a very limited vocabulary for being able to talk about the nuances in what they're feeling. But please tell me about your red pill stuff, because I'm curious.
Well, and I think this lays the foundation for the red pill stuff, because it's now we're on the next. It's like the next generation. So you had a whole generation of motherfuckers who don't know what they're feeling, and then all the hosts or like all the different outcomes of how bad that could get with intimate relationships, like male role models, because then when that got fractured, then now there's a hole, and people love to find the solution with something that exists outside themselves. But I really agree with that, and I think this is really your wheelhouse, because you've taught me a tremendous amount about this, and I don't think I would be the person I am today without our friendship. So I thank you for that, because I think it was like a little bit. I think the red pill stuff speaks to me, because it's like I saw some of the byproducts of it, but without, say, a red pill freaking person in my existence. Like, it was just this like, there's just certain things that I didn't deal with, and it just existed. And then there was these outcomes that I was chasing that I think put me in what could be a similar type scenario, but not that type of person. Like, I think I had a really positive friend group when I was younger that I helped build. And we were really close, that friend group. And I think that, so then it's like the red pill stuff, you can see right through it when you can see what's wrong with that type of thinking. But I think like that's where the biggest thing, it's the red pill stuff's really good, because you take this vulnerable group and you give them the answer to why they're feeling this way. And I think for me in my leadership career, it's just how things are going to be. There's a large group of people who don't want to think about it. And if your conviction's strong and you have a vision, they will follow you. And I think it's one of the things, like, my vision in fitness is really strong. And it's like, there's conviction in what my vision is, in relation to health and fitness and leadership. And then, say the roles that I've been through as a leader and what a personal trainer is. Like, a trainer to me isn't some funny continuum of, I've heard so many things, like people sleep with their trainers, to trainers are just like I'm not going to go into that round, but a trainer to me is a fucking powerful thing. A good trainer is a really, really, really powerful thing for people, because it's somebody who's versed in a lot of different continuums, who a lot of times has gone through something to champion a given outcome, and then now they start speaking to those people, so they're their own type of leader. But so for me, one of the things obviously I've learned in that as a leader is if your conviction is strong, people will follow you. So I think there's sort of a couple things with the red pill is you got this foundation of men who don't know how to sort of communicate their feelings, experience them, just put that shit in a box and do work. And then you have now this next group is like the red pill stuff. There's some things that are not bad. Like if you're a man and you get fit and you have a career and you have this vision that you work over at time, I think that solves a lot of problems. It did for me. It doesn't solve every problem, but if you're healthy and you have a good career, you have a lot, because then you have your own power of sort of well-being with your career. Like you have your own continuum, and then if you're healthy and fit, you're just going to be confident, and health is the gift. So being jacked is cool, but jacked is healthy and confident and strong per se. So that's good for men. Like that's good for young men, and have a good role model like that. And so what they do is they take this thing that's really good, and then they just bastardize it into this dark, twisted thing. And the red pill stuff I think is particularly nasty, because then you have a vulnerable group, and then now you make sort of like everybody else the problem. And this is the thing that like for me is the fundamental to the red pill stuff. No one's betting against you, man. It's like everybody's in their own world. And this was the thing that I think I fell prey to. I think growing up in a small town and seeing the deficit where, like, you know, I was the weird kid with the home trouble, and everybody knew that. And so it's like I saw the deficit, I saw the normal kids, and early on I think that put this chip on my shoulder and then obviously I have my own family background, so I don't think a lot was expected of me, but I had this chip, and it was like like something like, and it still speaks to me. I saw like a reel the other day, and it was just like the right music, and it's like, imagine their faces when you win. Like, I can't remember the way it quoted, but it was, imagine their faces when you actually do it, or something. And that still spoke to the core of that version of me that just felt like everybody was out to get me, and I needed to prove something wrong, or prove them wrong. And I would have just been so happy to see that like for them to see that I won. And it's funny because now in this continuum, I did everything in a way that I would have wanted over time, but that means nothing to me now. It's like there's way more to what my journey is about than proving some freaking a girl that said I was skinny like wrong, like or like just some kid that like bullied me. So what I can see with the red pill is I can see this version of me that is that was probably about 15 years old. I was starting to get away from some of I was fighting kids all the time. I had a chip on my shoulder, but I didn't quite have the social skills yet, and I didn't have like a good friend group yet. And then you take that version and you put him on his fucking phone and hearing some of this red pill stuff, and it sounds like maybe the answer. And that's what really, really rubs me the wrong way about the red pill stuff. Because what it does is it paints this vision that your bros are out to get you too. You got to be the alpha. The women are nothing but objects to reproduce with, and you should get a younger girl that doesn't really have a good mind so you can control the outcome, and she can't sleep with anybody else. That's just unacceptable. And you got to be the alpha. And so you got to go in this dark hole for the next 10 years and just freaking get jacked and smart and make money, which is like some of the maybe stuff that's not bad because it's leveraging on what that deficit is usually these are kids that have low confidence. They don't have a good friend group. They don't have any good role models. And then you provide them this answer that isn't not all total bad, but what's insidious about it is it's the very thing that could possibly be the worst thing for them, because then it's like it's taking this good thing and makes it look sort of reasonable in some aspects, but takes a real nasty motivation underneath it, and then stands on the foundation of the generation that didn't get the parenting they needed. And then this is that big older brother telling you that that girl that cheated on you, like, she's nothing and you can be everything. And that that friend that betrayed you, like, you're gonna fucking dominate him. And it's like, it speaks to me because there was a version of me who didn't have anything, who wanted everything. He wanted to be that guy. What is nasty about it is there's like the group that kind of needs some of the tidbit, like that little version of me. Nate, you needed to train. You needed to go out and put yourself in uncomfortable situations socially, and then like a quest of like mastery on a thing over a decade is one of the biggest things that's put me in a good place now. Like, I didn't give up on fitness. So it's like, it takes the sort of career success and fitness sort of success, but like sort of sexualizes it and bastardizes the relationship concept, which, sort of long story short, is something that group of people is vulnerable to because they didn't have a good male role model. And I had a dad, and I think that's one of the big things, is the things about my dad were a good male role model, but the things that he struggled with because of his mental illnesses, I think I didn't respect him. So it's like, there was things that were good about him, and he loved, and he was a gentle giant. And it's funny that now I want to be a little bit more like my dad, but a bit different. But it's like, I think that's the biggest thing, is it takes a group who is vulnerable to it and puts a real nasty thing in. And kind of the end of the continuum is that it damages this thing, because then the most important relationship you'll ever have, I believe, as a man, is your partner. Like, I think that's the most complex, the deepest, the most valuable relationship you ever have. And it makes it about some fucked up shit. Like, it's like, your partner should be a lot more than a sexual object or a reproducing tool or some sort of self-validating thing. That's your most important relationship. And then the other important relationships are the boys. Like, you need the boys. They're not your enemies. They're not just, they're like, that group is super important. And so I think the sort of baby boomer emotional regulation skill put in with this red pill dichotomy is two horrible enemies to the male loneliness epidemic. And I think the answer to the male loneliness epidemic is some of this stuff right here. Yeah, that's my rant on it. Yeah, any things you
Absolutely.
wanted to add there?
No,
yeah.
I think that's a wonderful way for us to begin wrapping it up, because I think it brings us full circle back to why this stuff is so important. That the pathway to happiness, like, yes, you should get fit and jacked. You should take care of yourself. You should have goals that you aspire to and work toward in your life, because it's not in achieving the goals, but it's the person you become in developing the skills and learning the determination and the consistency required to fulfill goals, who you become through that process. That's a worthwhile person that other people are going to want to be in relationship with. But then let go of this idea of emotional suppression and needing to have a man card, and letting go of the idea that like that vulnerability or empathy is weakness, and that people of all sexes and genders can't be friends with one another and have mutually beneficial and respectful relationships. Because what the research consistently tells us is that humans are happier in relationship with other people, and relationship doesn't come from blaming other people for your loneliness. Your loneliness is coming from your lack of social skill to be able to foster those relationships. And sometimes it's not about skill. Sometimes it's about like for yourself, you've got great social skills, but because you had deprioritized relationships and then in pursuit of the career goal had moved a number of times, and so had just kind of like eroded over time your social connections, now you're needing to kind of reprioritize that in your life in order to build that up. It's not a skills deficit in your case. It's more about circumstantial and kind of what got prioritized, but that it really is about developing the skills, putting yourself into situations, being willing to talk to strangers on the bus, being willing to be a healthy partner in your relationships, whether that's in your friendships or in your romantic relationships. And part of that is about being able to regulate your own emotions. It's about having the emotional intelligence to be able to read the emotional valence of the people that you're interacting with, like to be able to empathize enough to be able to read the room, so to speak. And that those things really are predictive of health and happiness. It's like, as you and I have been building up these layers of what does it mean to have a good, healthy life? Like there is sleep and there's good nutrition and there's strength and there's cardiovascular fitness and there's understanding your emotions and there's being able to manage your thoughts and your anxieties and your self-limiting beliefs and your shames and the armors, and there's relationships. Like all of those layers are building up the foundation of who you are to be able to enter into relationships, and that those are just as important as the mental, the emotional, the physical. The relationships is another kind of keystone piece.
Yeah, that was a really good sum of a lot of things, because I think it's like there's these arenas of life and there's a lot of different areas of competency in those arenas, and what is a well-lived and meaningful life is one that sort of puts them all together. And there's these parts of the story that I think are important, but kind of supersede all the other ones. Like you can really live a happy life with a lot of things not checked off and having good relationships. And it's like that's really what they really proved in this study in this book, is that it's like you can kind of have anything going on, and if you have rich relationships around, it's going to be better. You're going to feel more meaning, you're going to feel less dread, you're going to just rate overall better scores of well-being. I think that's such a powerful thing. And I think kind of for me, touching on that last one, is it's just kind of like the whole red pill shit and the stuff to deal with, sort of how baby boomers and a little bit earlier than that, and then say how it's moved on, haven't learned to regulate their emotions or experience them properly, is just like, this is kind of the whole point. It's like that girl that betrayed you just showed you something in yourself that you hadn't learned, and to love was beautiful. And it's like that love that you gave to that person isn't something you should never experience again because you're weak, and how dare you experience that thing. Or that guy that was more jacked than you in the friend group or bullied you or whatever was just going through his own journey, and you learning that experience create a foundation of something that was meaningful for you over time. And I think that's what's really nasty about the red pill stuff, and then some of the emotional regulation, is it's like, if you block the bad stuff, you're going to block the good stuff.
Yes.
You're not even going to realize you're in a good emotional experience when it's there, and you're going to continue to think everything's bad. And then on the red pill shit, if it's always about somebody else and you always block down and deregulate the dial of when things show you wrong or you feel pain, you're missing the whole point. So that pain is one of the reasons why you are alive. It's a yin and yang. You have to experience the bad and the good, and a lot of times the bad and the good isn't really bad and good. It's just an experience, and it's part of the continuum of what you need to go through to be a complete human over time. And I think for me, the answer in life is wisdom. I think when you experience things, even when they're intense, you learn something from that. But you didn't just learn, somebody cheating on you hurts. It's like when you go through that experience, the suffering is the antidote to ignorance. You then become more versed in that experience. Yeah, and then you're open to it, and then now you have empathy, and then you can be somebody who helps the next person that goes through. And I think that's the really answer to a lot of times the negative experiences, is you going through that. You now have a choice. You can just become another cog in the cycle, or you can be the reason it stops. And I think that's what's insidious about the red pill stuff, is it puts the wrong thing at the top. And I think that relationships are part of the biggest point. And I think that this book really came at the right time, even if it hurt for me. Because I think I'm already noting how much better my scores of well-being would be just putting myself out there, like going to run clubs, talking to random people at the gym. And you got to put yourself out there and take ownership over the low and what you can do about it, to not fall pity to the why me of the scenario. And even though it hurts, it's like you have autonomy here. You can take action, and just like you can go to the gym to get stronger, you could throw yourself into some uncomfortable social arena and you might find a friend. And even if you don't find a friend, 50 of those times, maybe that one time you find the relationship you were looking for.
Exactly. I love that. So thinking about this book then, and who you think might enjoy it, who would you recommend this book for?
I think you gotta be open to this. I think it's good for everybody, but if you're just like kind of like, I don't know, you're 21 years old and you're popping off on just figuring things out, you might not really get some of it. I think for me, it's good for anybody who is experiencing a low point right now, because I think it could be good for you if you're in the good time, like in a good relationship. But I think it really, really speaks to people who are going through a point where they don't really know why they're unhappy. But I think it'd be good for everybody. But I think it's a real good answer for people that are going through some hard times and they don't quite know what it is yet. Because I think for me, that was it. I didn't know why I was feeling like there was some, I was starting to recognize it, but this book kind of really put a spotlight on a controllable that I could deal with in a way. And I think that's why it's good for people that are going through, especially some loneliness. I think, it's good for the whole group that isn't leaving home. Like everybody should be mandated learning.
Yes. And I agree like that about like, if you are in a place where maybe you are feeling lonely or disconnected or dissatisfied in your relationships, this might be a painful read. But what I really do like in this is that they do give some really practical tips about, it's like to not put all your eggs in one basket. It's not just about one type of relationship. It's about, there's lots of different ways to get your social and relationship needs met. And they give some really practical advice about how to go about actually fostering good, healthy relationships and what that can look like. They give lots of examples of what that can look like over time. So I think it's, like I said, it might be a hard read, but it also gives some really concrete suggestions about what to do about it. So it's actionable. I think I also agree with your take on, it's probably not as great for somebody who's a little bit younger. Like I think so much of our young lives are about figuring out who we are as an adult, figuring out our careers, trying to push and make something of ourselves in our careers to get into a financially stable place, finding our romantic partners, often like building our like young families. And then in the early years of child rearing, you're just so consumed with all of that stuff. Like if a person has followed like a normative trajectory in that stuff, often like you're carried up in the momentum of that. And then inevitably though, because I have lots of friends, like I said, I've got lots of friends who are younger than me. And often then they find their person, they get married, they have the kids, and then 5 years into having had the last kid, and they're just like awash in toys and school runs and all of that stuff, then they kind of sit down and look at each other and go like, okay, but we've lost ourselves in this. And that's often that first moment, I think, where people start reflecting. But I think there's other points of reflection too. Me reading this at this stage in my life where I am stepping away from employment and going to be like, so I'm still going to be, it's not really retirement. I'm taking an early retirement package, but I'm not retiring. I'm going to be going to work for myself, but still stepping away from employment and becoming an entrepreneur. A lot of my social needs also got met at work. And so I am in this moment of transition of really trying to get ahead of what I think might be the grief and loss that I might feel after leaving employment because of the loss of those relationships. I'm trying to kind of anticipate some of that in advance and then think about like, okay, what are the social needs that we're getting met at work and how can I meet those social needs in a different way? So I think people who are more like midlife, like I am, I think it could also be hugely beneficial. But then there were some people in the study that didn't figure it out till they were in retirement. And so maybe it is a good retirement book for people as well. I think anytime you're feeling a little disconnected and maybe need some motivation for why you should make the effort to get reconnected, or need some tips about how to do that, this is probably a good book.
Yeah, because I think it's like you should go through that suffering, because then you learn why you shouldn't continue to behave that way. And I think it's like we need that. So it's like, it's hard to give somebody information when they haven't learned it yet. And so I think that's the best point for the book, but I 100% agree with that. And that's some proactive shit you're doing right now. That's good. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
Thank you.
I think it plays into some of the stuff that I'm doing right now with trying to feel good while good things are happening, but also feel grateful for things that I'm going to learn from the thing that I'm dealing with while dealing with the thing. So that's pretty proactive. I like that you're thinking about that. That's ahead of the game.
Yeah. I also, just to name it, appreciate just how mindful you are trying to be in this moment of transition, and just struggling, but also appreciating the struggle at the same time that you're going through it. Just wisdom in that. So to wrap up, Nate, how can the good creatures of this world find you on the internet?
They can find me at Nate Bolding on Instagram and TikTok. And where can they find you and the creatures' socials?
You can find both me and the creatures on Instagram and on TikTok. The podcast is posted on YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts.